Hi, welcome to Supermethian Learning. Today, we're going to look at fractions. Now, I know a lot of people have trouble with fractions, so today we're going to go right back to the beginning and look at what fractions actually are. Okay, so you've probably seen a lot of these before. Things like a half, 2/3, a quarter, 9/10. These are what fractions look like. But what are they exactly? Okay, I'm going to put my fantastic drawing skills to use here. And I'm going to take you back to prep or kindergarten or wherever it was you first learned how to count. And we're going to add one apple plus another apple. Okay, so one apple plus another apple gives us two apples. Okay, so what we're doing there is we're counting wholes. I know this seems pretty obvious, but to understand fractions now, what we're actually going to do is just look at one apple. And instead of adding another apple, we're going to take that one apple and we're going to divide it into two parts. Okay, so just assume that instead of eating your apple like a normal person, you decided to cut it in two like some sort of maniac. Who does that? But anyway, so you cut your apple into two. What you end up with now is two different pieces. And we call each of those pieces a half. So we've got two halves that make up this whole apple. Okay, so in that first or in that top part, what we were doing there was adding wholes. In this bottom section and with fractions, we're dividing a whole into pieces. That's what fractions really are. A fraction is a piece of a whole. Okay, so let's see what this looks like when we have a few more pieces. So this is a cake, and I'm just going to divide it up into 8 pieces. Okay, so those are 8 pieces of a cake. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take one of these pieces. So this piece here with the lime green frosting is going to be my piece. Okay, so I've got one piece out of a total of 8 pieces that make up the cake. Okay, so I've got 1/8 of the cake. Now, let's take another cake and I think this time let's divide it up into 4 pieces. Okay, so I'm going to give myself one piece, and I'm going to give my alien buddy, who I've nicknamed L, the other 3 pieces. Now, it's easy to see what this looks like just looking at the cake, but what does this look like as a fraction? Well, first, let's count up the total number of pieces. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces, and I've got 1 out of those 4 pieces. So my fraction is 1 out of 4, or 1/4. Now let's count up L's fraction. So how many pieces does L have? 1, 2, 3 pieces out of the total of 4. So L's fraction is going to be 3 pieces out of the total of 4 pieces that we divided the cake up into, or 3/4. Okay, because when we divide something into 4s, we also call it quarters. So let's talk about what the parts of a fraction actually mean. Okay, so that top part, or that 1, we call that the numerator. And this bottom part here, or the 4, we call the denominator. Now the numerator always goes on the top, and the denominator always goes on the bottom. Now how I remember this is I just think of fractions as not decimals. Even though fractions and decimals are actually kind of the same thing, I just think not decimals to help me remember that the n goes on the top and the d goes on the bottom. Okay, thinking back to that last example with the cake and dividing it up into 4 pieces. Here's our 4 pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4. What I did was I chose one of those pieces. So this was my piece that I chose. So what we could say here is this 1, or the numerator, is really the parts we chose. So we chose, or I chose, one piece of that cake out of a total of 4 pieces. So the denominator is the total number of pieces, or the total number of parts. So let's say that again. Your denominator is the total number of parts that you divided your whole up into. And your numerator are the number of pieces that you've selected out of those total number of parts. And then we take the ones we selected, the numerator, and we put them over the total number, the denominator. So obviously this applies to all fractions. If we take 1/3, 2/5, and 9/10, the 1, 2, and 9 here, our numerators, represent the number of parts that we chose. The denominators, 3, 5, and 10, that's the total number of parts that there were to choose from. So if we had a cake and we divided it up into 3 parts and we selected one of those parts, we would have 1/3. If we divided the cake up into 5 pieces and we selected 2 pieces, we'd have 2/5. And if we divided it up into 10 pieces and selected 9, we'd have 9/10. So those are fractions. They do get a little bit more complicated because there's so much we can do with fractions. And we'll get into that. But for right now, this is a good place to start to truly understand what fractions are and how they work. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.